Israel says its forces have completed the encirclement of Gaza City as it continues to strike Hamas militants in populated areas, with a spokesman calling it another significant stage in this war.
Meanwhile, in the south, around 92 British dual nationals have been permitted to cross the Rafah crossing in Egypt today, with the in-laws of Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, among them.
And the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Israel for further talks on humanitarian pauses in the fighting.
Our security reporter Mark White is in southern Israel with the latest. Mark, I think we are looking at some pictures. We are looking at Gaza City now. Bring us up to date with the latest.
Yeah, I'm just staying out of the way of the camera at the moment so we can concentrate on the Gaza skyline there. You're looking down towards Beit Hanun in the north of Gaza. There have been some significant air strikes just in the last couple of minutes before you came to us. So we're just going to continue to monitor that skyline in case there are any more strikes. But yeah, some very significant activity just in the last 5 minutes or so. There have been constant artillery fire from this area, also tank fire, and then fairly frequently we get the combat jets coming over as well, and the missiles released. There's a massive big shockwave that we even feel here reverberates through our bodies, so you can just imagine what it's like much further into the source of these explosions. They are enormous. Now, the Israelis are at pains to constantly point out that they don't target civilians. However, as part of this operation, they are bombing civilian areas, albeit they've asked civilians to head south repeatedly over recent days, and hundreds of thousands, though, have still decided they want to stay. And the result is they are staying and they are getting caught up in what is a relentless ground war by the Israelis, because the Israelis are adamant there will be no ceasefire. They say they are going to continue on with their ground war until they destroy Hamas. And that means pushing further and further into these built-up areas, striking with missiles, striking with artillery and tank fire, and taking on those Hamas terrorists with hand-to-hand combat. Effectively, they're going street to street, door to door, all of the while the Israelis tell us that they are suffering in terms of attacks from Hamas. Anti-tank missiles are being fired, RPG are being fired at them. Machine gun fire is regularly reverberating through the air here. We hear that now. I can hear in the distance, the mic probably doesn't pick it up, but there's more in the way of machine gun fire. And what happens is when that machine gun fire is triggered, you hear bursts of it, sustained bursts of machine gun fire. It means effectively that the Israelis have made contact. They've come across Hamas terrorists who've actually either another large explosion there with a huge plume of black-grey smoke now rising over the treetops there down towards the eastern outskirts of Beit Hanun. Another large airstrike. We're hearing the jets overhead that are coming in to launch these strikes. And as I say, the machine gun fire, it is because they've made contact, either being ambushed or they've come across a Hamas stronghold somewhere, and that's when they call in these jet fighters to release their missiles. Another large explosion there. Can't see the smoke from where that is coming from. But this an indication, guys, that, you know, this battle is still raging right here in the north of Gaza, despite the fact we're hearing from the Israeli Defense Forces that they have pushed further south, that they are encircling Gaza City. And that, of course, is another big part of their operation, the next important phase, it's described as by the Israelis, going into that Hamas stronghold. Beit Hanun, yes, of course there are significant Hamas numbers, but Gaza City is the stronghold. That's where they're headquartered. That's where hundreds of tunnel entrances are scattered throughout that city, and rocket launching positions and other positions waiting for the Israelis to eventually push into that city. It's going to be a long and a bloody battle ahead, as overhead we hear the telltale sound of a drone flying overhead as well.
With that aerial bombardment and then the ground engagement, as you say, Gaza City now encircled, Hamas dug in a huge underground network of tunnels, but the IDF, Benjamin Netanyahu, they've sworn they will not stop until Hamas have been completely wiped out. So we're now in that urban, face-to-face, close quarters combat phase of this operation, aren't we, Mark? It's getting dirty.
Yes, and Israel point to a statement made by Ghazi Hamad, who is a senior Hamas leader, being interviewed just 2 days ago, when he was asked about whether he wanted a ceasefire. And he said absolutely not, that they will continue to fight Israel. And he warned that there will be more October 7th, that is Hamas's stated goal, which is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and they will not rest as a group until they have achieved that aim. So Israel looks at that as all the evidence they ever needed to continue with this ground campaign, because, of course, understandably, there's so much concern for the hundreds of thousands of people caught up in this. But Israel say, we stop now, all we do is we allow Hamas to regroup, they feel emboldened, and they just target our civilian communities again. That's why they're pushing on with the destruction that you're seeing there until they reach this stated goal, if they ever get to it, of destroying Hamas, or at least degrading it to such an extent that it no longer poses a threat to the Israeli population.
And as we look at the images, we see these ongoing airstrikes, Mark. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza, so we can't actually verify this claim, but they claim that more than 9,000 people have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the 7th of October. I think we just could hear the sound of another airstrike there.
That's artillery, outgoing artillery. So you might see soon the impact area where that artillery shell has landed. But yeah, those artillery sounds are, just constant as well. There are artillery positions really on both sides of where we are, as well as tank fire coming from an area not too far from our position. And we're hearing an Apache helicopter now above as well. Now, the Apache gunships effectively have these Hellfire and another explosion there from our outgoing artillery barrage. The Apache gunships, they have, in the UK, Hellfire missiles, but the equivalent here, if it's not Hellfire, they can strike from miles out, and they can be pinpoint accurate in the place that they are aiming to fire at, even though they are effectively overhead here. And so we can hear constantly the Apaches coming over, the drones, the constant hum of those drones, which are, I think, mainly surveillance drones, giving the Israelis a good eye view of the battlefield. And then we hear also quite regularly the combat jets coming over that get called in by the ground troops when they make contact with the Hamas fighters. Yesterday, the IDF were saying that there was fierce fighting in that area you're looking at right there, Beit Hanun, with Hamas fighters dug into some of the high-rise buildings. You can probably see, if Ben pans to the right of frame for you, there are some high-rises that are still reasonably intact. It seems so there are still plenty of buildings for Hamas to be dug into, and they're just waiting. They're waiting for the troops, and they're waiting for the tanks, and as the tanks approach, they get ambushed, and then the Israelis have to respond to that. We know that we're hearing more sustained gunfire now coming from the direction of Beit Hanun, which probably means that the air cover, the Apache that we're hearing overhead, very sustained fire out now. Smoke also on the horizon there. That may well have been the Apache, I think, that fired the missiles at location there. So another plume of smoke filling the Gaza skyline over there, as clearly that fighting in that area, which we're right in the north of Gaza, we're just close to the border where we are with southern Israel. So the fact that these Hamas fighters are still dug in there and are still requiring a lot of effort from the Israeli military to shift them gives an indication of what we're going to see actually in Gaza City, because this is nothing in comparison to that stronghold further south. But it's still very significant nonetheless, as you're able to hear and see from these live images looking over into northern Gaza now and seeing that the absolute pummeling that those Hamas positions are getting, those Hamas positions, we should add, that are dug into civilian areas.
We listen to your very valuable commentary, Mark. We must just mention the British nationals that are still stuck, have been stuck since early October there. How many do we know how many might be allowed to leave Gaza today via the Rafah crossing into Egypt?
So we're told that on the latest list that's coming out, there will be just under 100 British nationals. There are other potentially dual nationals, Irish nationals as well. So the difficulty in trying to talk ahead of what's going to happen is even though it's supposedly controlled, it is so chaotic. People on the ground are under fire a lot of the time and not in positions where they can safely get to the Rafah crossing. So although 92 names might be on the list of British nationals today, that does not mean that they'll be able to get to the crossing and able to cross, either because they don't feel it's safe to move from where they are, maybe they're not in a position because, they've been injured or a member of their family has been injured. There's all kinds of reasons. We were expecting about 400 US citizens to leave yesterday. In the end, Joe Biden said it was just over 70. So lots going on the ground that means that the exodus of these foreign nationals through the Rafah crossing is not as straightforward as we'd like it to be.
OK, Mark White, thank you for that.